I spent 40 years raising my children, making them the center of my world. I cooked their favorite meals, attended every school event, and helped them build their lives. But last Christmas, my daughter Melissa relegated me to eating dinner, alone in the kitchen, away from the family table. What she didn't know was that inside her holiday envelope wasn't just a card. It contained the deed to her dream house that she'd been trying to buy for months. A house I had secretly purchased for her. My name is Margaret Wilson. At 67, I never imagined I'd be sitting here telling you this story. For most of my life, I believed that family meant everything, that the sacrifices parents make eventually return as love and respect. I was wrong, at least about my daughter Melissa. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra. Special for you. I was raised in a small town in Ohio, where family gatherings were sacred. My parents taught me that breaking bread together was the foundation of family bonds. I carried that belief into my own family when I married Thomas shortly after college. We had 3 children, Melissa, my eldest, then Jason and Sarah, just 14 months apart. Thomas worked as an engineer at the local manufacturing plant while I balanced part-time teaching with raising our children. Life was comfortable, if not luxurious. We saved diligently, lived modestly, and prioritized experiences over possessions. Every holiday, especially Christmas, was a production in our house. Homemade decorations, traditional recipes passed down through generations, and the dining room table set with my grandmother's china. When Thomas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in his early 50s, our world shattered. The children were in college or just starting their careers. Melissa had graduated with a business degree and was working at a marketing firm in Chicago. Jason was finishing his education degree, and Sarah was in her second year of nursing school. Thomas fought hard, but the disease was aggressive. During his 18 months of treatment, I became his full-time caregiver while still trying to work, enough to keep our health insurance. The medical bills mounted despite our insurance, slowly draining the savings we'd carefully built. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself, Maggie," Thomas whispered one night, just weeks before he passed. "Don't just live for the kids. Live for you, too." I nodded and held his hand, but I wasn't sure what living for me even looked like anymore. For 28 years, my identity had been wrapped up in being a wife and mother. After Thomas died, the children returned home for the funeral and stayed for 2 weeks. Then life called them back. Jobs, relationships, their own developing lives. I understood. I had raised them to be independent, to build their own paths. But the house felt cavernous without Thomas's laugh or the kids' footsteps. I threw myself into work, increasing my teaching hours and taking on private tutoring. The extra income helped manage the remaining medical bills, and the activity kept the grief at bay, at least during daylight hours. Over the next decade, life took unexpected turns. I had always imagined my children settling near home, Sunday. Dinners becoming a tradition, grandchildren running through the same hallways where their parents had played. Reality proved different. Jason married his college sweetheart Lauren and moved to Seattle for a teaching position. Sarah joined Doctors Without Borders and spent much of her time in various countries, returning stateside only a few months each year. Melissa remained the closest geographically, having moved from Chicago to Columbus after marrying Eric Taylor, a successful commercial real estate developer. Melissa and Eric's life ascended rapidly. They built a sprawling home in Worthington Hills, an exclusive community with manicured lawns and security gates. Eric's family had deep connections in Columbus society, and Melissa embraced their lifestyle wholeheartedly. She traded her casual wardrobe for designer labels, joined the right clubs, and cultivated friendships with people who could advance Eric's business interests. I was proud of her ambition, but sometimes wondered if she was happy or just successful. When they had twins, Madison and Miles, I offered to help, even considering relocating closer to them. "That's not necessary, Mom," Melissa said during one of our weekly phone calls. "We have a live-in nanny. Besides, you'd hate the suburbs after living downtown for so long." She wasn't wrong about my preference for my modest but charming Victorian home near the historic district where I'd lived with Thomas for most of our marriage. After his death, several financial advisors had suggested I downsize, but I couldn't bear to part with the home where we'd raised our family. Instead, I made it work by renting out the small carriage house in the back garden to graduate students. The arrangement provided additional income and, unexpectedly, companionship. Young people came and went, sharing occasional meals and bringing energy to the property. As my 60s approached, I made a significant career change. After 30 years of teaching high school English, I took early retirement and accepted a position as the education coordinator at the Riverside Community Foundation, a nonprofit focused on literacy and educational support for underserved communities. The role energized me in ways teaching hadn't for years. I designed programs, wrote grant proposals, and worked with community leaders to address educational inequities. The position came with a substantial increase in salary and responsibility. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt professionally fulfilled. I rarely discussed my work with Melissa. When I did, her responses were polite but disinterested. "That's nice, Mom," she'd say before steering the conversation back to the twins' latest achievements or Eric's newest development project. Over time, our interactions became increasingly predictable. I'd call to check in, she'd talk about the children and Eric's business ventures, I'd offer to visit, and she'd explain why that particular weekend wasn't convenient. I'd suggest they come to me, and there'd be a reason why that timing didn't work either. When they did visit, usually once or twice a year, Melissa would walk through my house with a critical eye. "Mom, don't you think it's time to update this kitchen? These cabinets are so dated." Or, "You should really hire a proper landscaping service. The front yard looks lived in." I understood the subtext. My home, my lifestyle, didn't match the image she cultivated. I hadn't kept pace with her ascension into Columbus's upper echelon. I represented a past she was carefully curating out of her present. Despite this growing distance, I maintained hope that family bonds would prevail. I continued sending thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays, calling regularly, and making myself available whenever they could fit me into their schedule. Last October, I received a surprising invitation from Melissa. "Mom, we're hosting Christmas this year. The whole family. Jason and Lauren are flying in with the kids, and Sarah's actually going to be stateside. Eric's parents are coming too. We want you to join us." My heart soared. This was the family gathering I'd been hoping for. All my children under one roof for the holidays. "I'd love to, sweetheart. Can I bring anything? Cook anything?" There was a slight hesitation before she answered. "Actually, Eric's hired a caterer. It's easier with so many people. Just bring yourself." In the weeks leading up to Christmas, I found myself filled with anticipation. I shopped carefully for presents, selecting items that reflected each person's interests and preferences. For the grandchildren, books and educational games. For my children and their spouses, thoughtful, personal gifts. For Melissa, something special. Earlier that year, during one of our calls, she had mentioned a historic property that had come on the market, a beautiful Victorian in German Village, not unlike my own home, but in a neighborhood that had become increasingly prestigious. Eric wasn't interested in the investment, considering it too small for the financial return, but Melissa had spoken about it with unusual emotion. "It reminds me of growing up, Mom. Those Sunday afternoons when you and Dad would take us to the park and we'd walk through the historic district afterward, picking out our dream houses." The property had lingered in my mind. When I received an unexpected windfall, a combination of a life insurance policy from Thomas that had finally paid out after a long dispute and the proceeds from some investments that had performed better than anticipated. I made an impulsive decision. I contacted a realtor, viewed the property, and made an offer. The timing was perfect. The seller was motivated, and with my solid credit and the ability to make a substantial down payment, the transaction proceeded smoothly. By early December, I held the deed to the house that had captured Melissa's imagination. Rather than telling her immediately, I decided to make it a Christmas gift. I placed the deed and keys in a simple envelope, wrapped it in elegant paper, and tucked it into my suitcase as I packed for the holiday visit. I imagined her face when she opened it. Perhaps this gesture would bridge the growing gap between us, showing her that I still knew her heart despite the trappings of her new life. Little did I know how that Christmas would unfold, or how completely my understanding of my daughter, and perhaps her understanding of me, would change before the holiday ended. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I arrived at Melissa and Eric's house on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Their home was even more impressively decorated for the holidays. Professional lighting outlined the roofline and windows, and an enormous wreath adorned the front door. Through the large windows, I could see a towering Christmas tree in the foyer, at least 12 feet tall and decorated in a coordinated silver and blue theme. Standing on the doorstep with my suitcase and bags of carefully wrapped presents, I felt a flutter of nervousness. It had been nearly 8 months since I'd seen Melissa in person. Our phone conversations had grown shorter and less frequent, often interrupted by her other obligations. The door swung open to reveal not Melissa, but Heather, the twins' nanny, a pleasant young woman in her 20s who greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Wilson, welcome. Let me help you with those bags." "Thank you, Heather. Are Melissa and the children home?" "Mrs. Taylor is in her office on a conference call. The twins are at their piano lesson and should be back within the hour. Mr. Taylor is at the office but said he'd be home for dinner." Mrs. Taylor. It still sounded strange when people referred to my daughter that way, though she'd been married for nearly 15 years. Heather showed me to the guest room, not the usual one I stayed in, which was on the main floor near the family rooms, but a smaller room tucked away on the 3rd floor, ostensibly part of the nanny's quarters. "I hope this will be comfortable," Heather said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Taylor mentioned the main guest suite is being prepared for her in-laws." "This is fine," I assured her, though the message was clear. Eric's parents took precedence. The room was perfectly nice, clean and well-appointed, if somewhat isolated from the rest of the household. I unpacked my few things, carefully arranged the presents in the shopping bags to prevent wrinkles in the paper, and took a moment to freshen up before heading downstairs. The house was immaculate, decorated like a spread from Architectural Digest, rather than a family home at Christmas. No handmade ornaments or sentimental decorations disrupted the designer theme. I navigated through rooms that seemed designed to impress rather than welcome, finally finding Melissa in her home office. She was seated behind an imposing desk, speaking into a headset while typing rapidly on her laptop. She glanced up, gave a quick wave, and held up one finger to indicate she'd be just a minute. I waited, taking in the space. Awards on the walls, family photos in sleek frames, all presenting the image of perfect success. Finally, she ended the call and removed her headset. "Mom, you made it. How was the drive?" "Not bad at all." The weather cooperated. I stepped forward, arms open for a hug. Melissa stood and gave me a quick embrace, the kind reserved for casual acquaintances before stepping back. "I see Heather. Got you settled upstairs. I hope the room is okay. We've got quite a full house this Christmas." "It's fine. I'm just happy to be here with everyone." I meant it sincerely. Whatever tensions existed between us, being together as a family was what mattered most to me. "The twins will be excited to see you. They're at piano now, but they'll be back soon. Jason's flight lands tomorrow morning and Sarah's coming in tomorrow evening. She glanced at her watch. I've got one more call in 10 minutes. Then I need to check in with the caterers about tomorrow's dinner. Can I help with anything? I offered. Melissa's smile tightened slightly. Everything's under control. The staff has it covered. Why don't you rest after your drive? Dinner's at 7. Staff. She made it sound like she was running a small hotel rather than a family home. I retreated to my room, feeling oddly like an imposition rather than a welcomed guest. To pass the time, I pulled out my laptop and checked emails. There were several from my colleagues at the foundation, including updates on grant applications and program planning for the coming year. I responded to the most pressing messages, then opened a document containing my notes for a new literacy initiative I was developing. Immersed in work, I nearly missed the sound of children's voices downstairs. I closed my laptop and hurried down to greet my grandchildren. Madison and Miles, now 12, had grown significantly since I'd last seen them. Both had inherited Melissa's auburn hair and Eric's tall stature. They were engaged in what appeared to be a heated debate about their piano recital when I entered the kitchen. "Grandma!" Miles spotted me first, his face lighting up. He rushed over for a hug, still uninhibited in his affection despite approaching his teenage years. Madison followed, more reserved but still warm. "We didn't know you were here already." "I just arrived a few hours ago. How are my favorite twins?" "How was piano?" This launched them into a detailed account of their lessons, their progress on different pieces, and the upcoming recital. I listened attentively, asking questions and delighting in their enthusiasm. Despite the distance and infrequent visits, we had maintained a connection through video calls and the care packages I regularly sent. Our conversation was interrupted by Heather announcing it was time for homework before dinner. The twins groaned, but complied, promising to continue our conversation later. I didn't see Melissa again until dinner, which was served precisely at 7 in the formal dining room. Eric had returned from work, looking tired, but making an effort to engage in family conversation. The meal was delicious, but had clearly been prepared by someone else and simply reheated by Heather. No one acknowledged this fact. Apparently, this was their normal routine. The conversation centered mostly around Eric's latest development project and the twins' activities. When I mentioned the new literacy program I was developing at the foundation, Eric seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about the impact metrics and funding structure. "That actually sounds impressive, Margaret," he said. "I didn't realize your foundation had that kind of reach." "We've grown significantly in the past few years," I explained, warming to the subject. "Our last annual report showed we've impacted over 15,000 children in the metro area." "Mom was always good with the underprivileged," Melissa interjected, her tone suggesting she was paying me a compliment, though it felt slightly dismissive. "Remember how she used to make us volunteer at that homeless shelter during the holidays, Eric?" "It taught me a lot about empathy and service," I noted, maintaining my composure. "Values I hope to pass on." An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Eric asking the twins about their science project. The rest of the meal proceeded without further discussion of my work. After dinner, I offered to help clean up, but Heather appeared to handle that task. Instead, I joined the family in the media room, where Eric suggested watching a Christmas movie. The twins chose a recent animated feature I hadn't seen. The room was equipped with plush recliners and a screen that rivaled commercial theaters. As the movie played, I observed my daughter's family, comfortable in their luxury, somewhat disconnected from each other as they simultaneously watched the film and checked their devices. I thought about the Christmases of Melissa's childhood, how we would gather around our modest television, sharing a bowl of popcorn, laughing and commenting on the movie together. The contrast was stark, but I reminded myself that different didn't necessarily mean worse. They had created their own traditions, their own patterns of family life. The following day brought welcome chaos as Jason and his family arrived mid-morning. Lauren and their 3 children brought an energy to the house that had been missing. The cousins immediately reconnected, running through the house with the exuberance of children who see each other too rarely. Jason embraced me warmly. At 41, he looked remarkably like his father. The same crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, the same gentle manner. "Mom, you look fantastic," he said, holding me at arm's length to inspect me. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." "Just keeping busy with work and trying to stay active," I replied, touched by his genuine affection. "Lauren's been following the Foundation's social media," he said. "That literacy carnival you organized last month looked amazing." Lauren joined us, confirming Jason's comment. "The photos were incredible. All those children with their new books. And the activity stations. You've really built something special, Margaret." Their recognition of my work warmed me deeply. We spent the morning catching up, with Jason asking thoughtful questions about my programs and sharing updates about his teaching career and their life in Seattle. Sarah arrived that evening, tanned, from her recent work in Honduras and full of stories about the mobile clinic she'd been running. At 38, my youngest remained the most adventurous of my children, her life a series of meaningful challenges in difficult circumstances. With everyone present except Eric's parents, who would arrive on Christmas Eve, the house felt more like a home. Dinner that night was lively, with conversations overlapping as family members caught up with each other. I noticed Melissa seemed tense, frequently checking her phone and slipping away to make calls, presumably finalizing details for Christmas Day. Late that evening, after the children had gone to bed, the adult siblings gathered in the den with glasses of wine. It was the first time in years all 3 of my children had been together without spouses or children present. I sat slightly apart, content to watch them interact, remembering similar moments from their childhood. The private jokes, the shorthand communication, the unspoken understanding that exists between siblings. "So, Mom," Sarah turned to me, curling her legs under her on the sofa. "Jason and I were talking earlier. We're concerned you're still rattling around in that big house by yourself. Have you thought about downsizing?" I hadn't expected this topic to arise so early in the visit. "I'm perfectly comfortable in my home. It's manageable, and I enjoy having the space when you all visit." "But we visit so rarely," Jason pointed out. "And it's a lot of maintenance for one person." "The rental income from the carriage house helps cover the costs," I explained. "And I've made modifications over the years to make things easier. The new heating system, the updated kitchen." "It's not just about the house itself," Melissa joined in, setting down her wine glass. "It's about your future needs. You're approaching 70, Mom. What happens if you fall or get sick? I have neighbors who check on me regularly, a security system with medical alert features, and I'm in excellent health according to my last physical." I kept my tone light, though I was beginning to feel defensive. "We worry," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You've always been so independent, but there's no shame in planning for additional support as you age." I appreciated their concern, even as I recognized they didn't fully understand my current life. I'm not opposed to making changes when necessary, but right now, my home works for me. It's central to my community work, convenient to the Foundation, office, and frankly, full of memories I'm not ready to part with. The conversation shifted to other topics, but I noticed the glances exchanged between my children. They had discussed this among themselves before bringing it to me, a realization that left me feeling slightly marginalized, as if decisions about my life were being considered without my full participation. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the day's interactions. My children loved me. Of that, I had no doubt. But there seemed to be a growing gap between how they perceived me, as an aging mother who might soon need management, and how I experienced my own life. Busy, purposeful, and far from finished. I fingered the envelope containing the deed to the Victorian house, tucked safely in my suitcase. Would my Christmas gift to Melissa be understood as I intended it? A gesture of love and connection to our shared past? Or would it somehow widen the growing distance between us? With Eric's parents arriving tomorrow and Christmas Day itself following, I sensed the family dynamics would only grow more complex. Little did I know just how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. Christmas Eve arrived with a flurry of activity. Eric's parents, Charles and Vivian Taylor, swept into the house like visiting dignitaries, bringing with them an entourage of luggage and an immediate shift in the household atmosphere. Charles was a distinguished man in his 70s who had built a commercial real estate empire across 3 states. Vivian, equally impressive in her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer suits, had been a prominent figure in Columbus society for decades. I watched from the top of the stairs as they were welcomed into the foyer with embraces and excited greetings. The main guest suite had been prepared for them, complete with fresh flowers and a basket of gourmet snacks. The contrast to my own arrival wasn't lost on me. "Margaret, come meet Eric's parents," Melissa called up the stairs, her voice carrying the artificially bright tone she used when entertaining. I descended to find Charles and Vivian examining the family photos arranged on the entrance hall table. Charles offered a firm handshake and a polite smile. Vivian's greeting was cooler, her eyes taking in my simple sweater and slacks with the barely concealed assessment of someone accustomed to judging others by their appearance. "So you're Melissa's mother?" Vivian said, her tone suggesting she was placing me in a very specific category. "How lovely to finally meet you. Melissa has told us so much about your community work." The pause before community work hung in the air like a small insult. I smiled politely, accustomed to this type of subtle dismissal from people who equated wealth with worth. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," I replied. "Melissa and Eric have built a beautiful home here." "Yes, they've done quite well for themselves," Charles agreed, his chest puffing with pride. Eric's latest development in Grandview Heights is particularly impressive. 57 luxury townhomes, all pre-sold before construction was complete. The conversation immediately turned to real estate ventures, family business connections, and the social events the Taylors had attended throughout the year. I found myself relegated to the role of silent observer as they discussed people and places I had no connection to. Melissa floated between the groups, ensuring everyone was comfortable, but I noticed her attention was primarily focused on her in-laws. When Vivian mentioned being cold, Melissa immediately adjusted the thermostat. When Charles complained about the music being too loud, she hurried to lower the volume. She had become a different version of herself in their presence, more deferential, more eager to please. The evening proceeded with cocktails in the living room, followed by a catered dinner that was considerably more elaborate than our previous meals. The conversation remained centered on business ventures, country club events, and the social circles that defined the Taylors' world. "Melissa, dear," Vivian said during the main course, "didn't you mention that charity auction next month? The one benefiting the Children's Hospital?" "Yes, I'm chairing the silent auction committee," Melissa replied, her voice filled with the pride of someone who had been entrusted with an important responsibility. "Wonderful. It's so important to give back to those less fortunate." Vivian's gaze swept the table, briefly settling on me. Of course, there are so many worthy causes. One hardly knows where to focus one's efforts. Sarah, who had been quietly eating, looked up. "Margaret actually runs one of the most effective literacy programs in the state. The Riverside Community Foundation has done incredible work in underserved communities." Charles raised an eyebrow, with mild interest. "Literacy programs? That's admirable." The word admirable carried the same dismissive tone Vivian had used earlier. I felt my cheeks warm, but maintained my composure. "It's rewarding work," I said simply. "Education has always been important to me." "Of course," Vivian agreed, her smile not reaching her eyes. Though one does wonder about the sustainability of such programs. Without proper funding and oversight, these grassroots efforts can sometimes do more harm than good. The implicit criticism was clear. My work was being categorized as amateur, well-intentioned, but ultimately insignificant compared to the Taylor family's more substantial charitable contributions. Jason leaned forward, his expression sharpening. Actually, Mom's Foundation has been recognized at the national level. They've received federal grants and have been featured in several educational journals. How interesting, Charles murmured, though his attention had already shifted to Eric's explanation of his latest acquisition. The remainder of the evening followed a similar pattern. Any mention of my work or achievements was met with polite but dismissive responses, while Eric and Melissa's accomplishments were celebrated with genuine enthusiasm. By the time we retired for the evening, I felt invisible, present but not truly acknowledged as a person of substance or value. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. I woke early, as was my habit, and made my way quietly downstairs to make coffee. The house was still silent, its inhabitants sleeping late after the previous evening's festivities. I stood at the kitchen window, watching cardinals dart between the bare branches of the oak trees, and tried to shake off the melancholy that had settled over me. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of Jason and Lauren, both early risers like myself. They joined me for coffee, and we shared a comfortable half-hour of quiet conversation before the children began stirring. "Mom," Jason said, setting down his mug, "I hope you don't take anything Vivian said last night personally. She's particular about things, very focused on image and status." "I'm fine," I assured him, though his acknowledgement of the slight was both validating and painful. "I've encountered that attitude before." Lauren shook her head. "What you've accomplished with the foundation is incredible. I looked up your annual report online last night. 15,000 children impacted this year alone. That's extraordinary." Their support meant more than I could express, but it also highlighted the vast difference in how my various children viewed my work and my worth. Jason and Sarah saw me as a capable professional, making a meaningful difference. Melissa seemed to view my work as a hobby that occasionally embarrassed her in front of her more sophisticated friends and family. The morning unfolded with the controlled chaos of Christmas morning in a house full of children. The twins and their cousins raced through the elaborate gift exchange, their excitement filling the formal living room with genuine joy. I watched from a corner chair, taking pictures and enjoying their happiness. The adults exchanged gifts with more ceremony. I had selected thoughtful presents for everyone: books for Jason and Lauren, a handcrafted jewelry box for Sarah from a local artisan, and wine from a small Ohio vineyard for Eric. Each gift was carefully chosen to reflect the recipient's interests and personality. When it came time for Melissa's gift, my heart began to race. The envelope containing the deed to the Victorian house was wrapped in silver paper, innocuous among the other packages. I had imagined this moment for weeks: her surprise, her joy, the reconnection it might forge between us. "From me," I said, handing her the package with hands that trembled slightly. Melissa tore off the wrapping paper with the same efficiency she applied to everything else in her life. She opened the envelope and extracted the deed, her eyes scanning the document with growing confusion. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at me. "What is this?" "It's the deed to the Victorian house in German Village," I explained, my voice filled with the excitement I'd been containing for weeks. "The one you mentioned loving. I bought it for you." The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation in the room ceased as family members turned to stare at us. Melissa's expression shifted from confusion to something I couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something else. Something that looked almost like horror. "You bought me a house?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I remember how you talked about it," I said, suddenly feeling less confident. "How it reminded you of your childhood, of our walks through the historic neighborhoods. I thought—" "You thought what?" Melissa's voice was rising now, attracting the attention of everyone in the room. That you could just buy me a house without discussing it with me? Without consulting Eric? Eric had moved to stand beside his wife, looking over her shoulder at the deed. His expression was grim. "Margaret," he said slowly, "this property is worth at least $400,000. Where did you get this kind of money?" The question stung, carrying with it an implication that I couldn't possibly have legitimate access to such funds. I felt the eyes of the entire family on me, including Charles and Vivian, whose expressions suggested they were watching a particularly distasteful scene unfold. "I have investments," I said, my voice defensive despite my efforts to remain calm. "Insurance policies that matured. I've been careful with money for years. But this is—" Melissa gestured helplessly at the deed. "This is completely inappropriate. You can't just buy someone a house without their permission." "I thought you'd be happy," I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "You said you loved this house. I wanted to give you something meaningful." "Meaningful." Melissa's voice was sharp now. "Mom, this is controlling. This is exactly the kind of behavior that worries us about your judgment." The words hit me like a physical blow. My judgment. My attempt to give my daughter something beautiful, something that connected to our shared memories, was being characterized as evidence of mental decline. "I'm sorry," I said, standing abruptly. I didn't mean to upset anyone." "The problem isn't that you upset anyone," Vivian interjected, her voice cutting through the tension. "The problem is that this shows poor judgment. Elderly people often make impulsive financial decisions that put their security at risk. Elderly people." The phrase echoed in my head as I looked around the room. Every face except Sarah's and Jason's reflected some degree of agreement with Vivian's assessment. I was being dismissed not just as wrong, but as incompetent, as someone whose judgment could no longer be trusted. "I think I need some air," I said, my voice barely steady. I walked quickly toward the kitchen, through the breakfast nook, and out onto the back patio. The cold December air hit my face like a shock, but it was preferable to the suffocating atmosphere. Inside, I could hear voices from the living room, but couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. Sarah appeared beside me within minutes, wrapping a warm shawl around my shoulders. "Mom, are you okay?" I couldn't answer immediately. The gift I had imagined as a bridge between Melissa and me had instead become a chasm. What I had seen as generous, she saw as controlling. What I had meant as love, she had interpreted as evidence of failing competence. "I just wanted to give her something special," I finally said, my voice breaking. "Something that would show her I understood what mattered to her." "I know," Sarah said, putting her arm around my shoulders. "But she's not in a place where she can see that right now." Through the window, I could see the family still gathered in the living room, their body language suggesting an intense discussion was taking place. Melissa was pacing, her hands gesturing as she spoke. Eric stood with his arms crossed, while his parents sat with the expressions of people watching a drama unfold. "They're talking about me," I said. "Probably," Sarah admitted. "But not everyone agrees with how this played out. Jason is in there defending you right now." As if summoned by her words, Jason appeared at the back door. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, his expression serious. I nodded, following him back inside to the kitchen, where we sat at the breakfast bar. Through the doorway, I could see the living room gathering had dispersed, though I could hear Eric's voice from his office and Melissa's from somewhere upstairs. "What's happening?" I asked. Jason rubbed his forehead, looking tired. "There's a family meeting being called for this afternoon. Melissa is concerned about your financial decision-making. Eric thinks the house purchase demonstrates impulsive behavior that could indicate cognitive decline." "Cognitive decline?" The words came out as a strangled whisper. "Mom, listen to me," Jason said, reaching across to take my hands. "Sarah and I don't agree with this assessment," We think your gift was generous, if somewhat misguided in its execution. But Melissa is scared. She's convinced that you're making decisions that could jeopardize your financial security. And what does that mean for me? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Jason's expression was grim. They want to discuss next steps. Melissa thinks you need more oversight, more support. Eric is talking about legal guardianship. They're me. Word hit me like a thunderbolt. Guardianship. The legal mechanism that would strip me of my autonomy, my right to make decisions about my own life and finances. The gift I had intended as an expression of love had become evidence for taking away my independence. As I sat in that kitchen, with the sounds of my family's voices discussing my future without me, I realized that Christmas Day was about to become the day my life changed forever. The question was whether that change would be something I could control, or something that would be imposed upon me. The envelope with the deed still sat on the coffee table in the living room, an innocent piece of paper that had sparked a family crisis. But as I would soon discover, it was also about to become my unexpected salvation. The family meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock, between Christmas brunch and dinner. I spent the intervening hours in my room, ostensibly resting but actually preparing for what felt like a trial. Sarah brought me tea and a sandwich, sitting with me as I tried to process what was happening. "I can't believe this is where we are," I said, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured backyard. "This morning, I thought I was giving my daughter the perfect gift. Now I'm facing a competency hearing." "It's not a hearing, Mom," Sarah said gently. "It's just family talking." "Is it?" I asked. "Because Jason mentioned guardianship. That's not just family talking, that's legal action." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Eric has already called his attorney. Not for guardianship proceedings, but for advice about how to handle this situation." My heart sank. The machinery was already in motion. In the span of a few hours, I had gone from beloved grandmother to potential ward of the state, or more. Accurately, ward of my daughter and son-in-law. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," I said, turning to face her directly. "I am not losing my mind. This wasn't an impulsive purchase made in a moment of confusion. I researched that property for months. I consulted with my financial advisor. I had the title searched and the property inspected. This was a calculated decision made by someone in full possession of her faculties." "I believe you," Sarah said, "but you're going to need to prove that to them." At 2 o'clock, I descended to the living room where the family had assembled in what looked disturbingly like a formal intervention. Melissa and Eric sat together on one sofa, his parents flanking them in matching armchairs. Jason and Lauren occupied another sofa, while Sarah had claimed a single chair near the windows. An empty chair, clearly intended for me, sat in the center like a defendant's dock. I chose to remain standing. "Please, Mom, sit down," Melissa said, her voice artificially gentle in the way people use when speaking to invalids or children. "I'm comfortable standing, thank you." Eric cleared his throat. "Margaret, we're all here because we care about you and we're concerned about this morning's incident." "Incident?" I repeated. "Is that what we're calling a Christmas gift now?" "A Christmas gift doesn't typically involve transferring property worth nearly $500,000, Charles interjected. "That's a major financial transaction that requires careful consideration and professional consultation." "You're absolutely right," I agreed, which is why I spent 3 months researching the property, consulting with my financial advisor, having multiple inspections done, and reviewing comparable sales in the area before making an offer. This seemed to surprise them. Eric frowned. "You consulted with a financial advisor?" "Of course I did. Did you think I just walked into a real estate office and pointed at a random house?" I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. Melissa leaned forward. "Mom, we know you think you did your research, But elderly people often believe they're making rational decisions when they're actually— Stop, I said firmly. Stop right there. I am 67 years old, not 97. I have all my faculties. I manage a multi-million-dollar foundation, and I have been making sound financial decisions for decades. The condescending tone stops now. The room fell silent. I could see I had surprised them with my directness, but I was past the point of polite accommodation. Perhaps we could hear more about this research process, Jason suggested diplomatically. I pulled out my phone, grateful that I had saved the relevant documents to my cloud storage. The property at 847 Maple Street in German Village came on the market in September. I first viewed it in October with Rebecca Martinez from Coldwell Banker. The asking price was $485,000, which was consistent with comparable sales in the neighborhood. Over the past 18 months, I scrolled through my files as I spoke. I had a comprehensive inspection done by Harrison Home Inspections on October 15th. The property appraised at $475,000. I consulted with my financial advisor, David Chen at Merrill Lynch, who confirmed that the purchase would represent approximately 30% of my liquid assets, well within recommended parameters for real estate investment. The family stared at me as I continued. I reviewed the neighborhood's appreciation trends over the past decade, researched the German Village Commission's renovation requirements, and confirmed that the property qualified for historic tax credits that would offset approximately 15% of any necessary improvements. Eric's expression had shifted from patronizing concern to something resembling respect. You have all of this documented? Of course I do. Would you like to see the inspection report, the appraisal, my financial advisor's written recommendation? I held up my phone. I can forward everything to your email right now. Vivian, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. That's quite thorough. It's what any competent person does before making a major purchase, I replied. I may not move in your social circles, but I'm not financially naive. Melissa looked confused, as if the narrative she had constructed in her mind was colliding with evidence that didn't fit. But Mom, why didn't you tell me you were doing all this? Why the secrecy? Because it was meant to be a surprise. A gift. I wanted to see your face when you realized you could have the house you'd fallen in love with. I felt my voice softening slightly. I wanted to give you something that connected to your childhood, to the dreams we used to share walking through those neighborhoods. But you should have discussed it with us first, Eric insisted. A gift of this magnitude affects our financial planning, our tax situation. How? I asked. How does my giving Melissa a house affect your finances? There are no liens, no obligations. It's a free and clear gift. Eric opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The question had apparently not occurred to him. The issue isn't the financial impact, Charles said smoothly. It's the precedent this sets. If you're making impulsive major purchases now, what's next? How do we know you won't be taken advantage of by scammers or make even larger mistakes? Because this wasn't impulsive, and it wasn't a mistake, I said firmly. It was a carefully considered gift from a mother to her daughter. The only mistake was assuming it would be received in the spirit it was given. Lauren, who had been silent throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke up. Can I ask something? Margaret, you mentioned managing a multi-million-dollar foundation. What exactly does that involve? I was grateful for the question. The Riverside Community Foundation has assets of approximately $12 million. I oversee grant distribution, program development, and strategic planning. Our board includes 3 bank presidents, 2 university provosts, and the chief financial officer of one of the largest corporations in Ohio. They wouldn't have hired me if they had concerns about my judgment or capabilities. You hired yourself, Melissa said quietly. I mean, you started there as a volunteer and worked your way up. It's not like you were recruited by some outside search firm. The implication stung, but it also revealed something important about how my daughter viewed my accomplishments. In her mind, My professional success was somehow less legitimate because it hadn't followed traditional corporate pathways. "You're right," I said. "I started as a volunteer. Then I was asked to coordinate the literacy program. Then to manage all educational initiatives. Then to serve as interim director when the previous director retired. And finally, to accept the permanent position when the board voted unanimously to offer it to me." I paused, letting that sink in. "The reason they kept promoting me, Melissa, is because I was good at the job. Good enough that our annual fund has grown by 400% during my tenure. Good enough that we've received national recognition for our programs. Good enough that I was invited to present at the National Conference on Community Foundations last year." This was clearly news to most of the family. I realized that while I had mentioned my work over the years, I had downplayed my achievements, assuming my children understood the scope of what I was doing. I had been wrong. "Why didn't you tell us about any of this?" Jason asked, though his tone was curious rather than accusatory. "I did tell you, but I suspect you heard Mom's volunteer work rather than Mom's professional career. Just like this morning, you heard impulsive purchase by confused elderly woman rather than carefully planned gift from financially competent adult." The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses. This one felt contemplative rather than tense. Finally, Eric spoke. "Margaret, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on prejudices I apparently hold about age and retirement. That was wrong. Wasn't a complete vindication, but it was a start. However," he continued, "the question remains, what do we do about the house?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, Melissa doesn't want it. She's made that clear. We can't accept a gift of this magnitude, especially given how it was presented." I looked at my daughter, who had remained largely silent during the latter part of the conversation. "Is that true, Melissa? You don't want the house?" She was quiet for a long moment. "It's not that I don't want it, Mom. It's that I can't accept it. Not like this. Not when it feels like you're trying to buy your way back into my good graces." The words hit harder than any accusation of incompetence. "Is that what you think this was?" "I don't know what to think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been so distant lately. We barely talk. And then suddenly you're buying me houses. It feels manipulative." I sank into the chair I had been avoiding, the fight suddenly gone out of me. My attempt to bridge the gap between us through generosity had been interpreted as manipulation. My careful research and planning had been dismissed as impulsive behavior. My professional accomplishments had been minimized as volunteer work. "I think," I said slowly, "that we have a much bigger problem than a house deed." And as I looked around the room at my family, some supportive, some skeptical, all clearly seeing me differently than I saw myself, I realized that the next phase of this conversation would determine not just what happened to the house, but what happened to my relationships with my children and my autonomy as an adult. The gift that was supposed to bring us together had instead revealed the vast differences in how we perceived each other. The question now was whether those differences could be bridged, or whether this Christmas would mark the beginning of an irreparable divide. The afternoon was far from over, and neither was this confrontation. The family meeting dissolved without resolution, leaving everyone emotionally drained and uncertain about how to proceed. Eric retreated to his office to make phone calls, presumably to his attorney and business associates. Charles and Vivian disappeared to their room, citing Jet. Lag, though I suspected they were simply uncomfortable with the family drama they had witnessed. The children, sensing the tension, had been whisked away by Heather to the media room for movies and snacks. I found myself alone in the guest room, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared older than I felt, tired lines around her eyes, silver hair that had lost its earlier styling, shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the afternoon's confrontations. When had my family begun seeing me as fragile? When had I become someone whose judgment was questioned rather than respected? A soft knock interrupted my brooding. Sarah entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Hot chocolate," she announced, settling into the room's single chair. "With the tiny marshmallows, just like when we were kids." The gesture was so unexpectedly nurturing that I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you." "That was intense downstairs," Sarah said after. We'd both taken a few sips. "I'm proud of how you handled yourself." When you started rattling off all those financial details, Eric's face was priceless. "A lot of good it did me," I replied. "Melissa still thinks I was trying to manipulate her." Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Can I ask you something, Mom? And I want you to be completely honest with me." I nodded, though I felt a flutter of apprehension. "Was any part of this gift about trying to repair your relationship with Melissa?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I considered deflecting or giving the easy answer, but Sarah deserved honesty. "Yes," I admitted. "But not in the way she thinks. I wasn't trying to buy her love or manipulate her into spending more time with me. I was trying to show her that I still knew who she was underneath all the designer clothes and social climbing. The woman who used to walk through German Village with me, picking out her dream house, talking about the kind of life she wanted to build. And you thought giving her that dream house would bring back that connection?" "I hoped it might," I said, softly. "I hoped it would remind her that we used to share dreams, used to understand each other. Before I became an embarrassment to her social status." Sarah leaned forward, her expression intense. "Mom, when did you start feeling like an embarrassment to Melissa?" The question forced me to confront something I had been avoiding. "Gradually, over the past few years. Little comments about my clothes when we went to her country club. Suggestions that I might be more comfortable staying home when they had certain friends over. The way she introduces me to her new acquaintances, not as Margaret Wilson, foundation director, but as my mother, with that apologetic tone people use when they're explaining something awkward." "That's not okay," Sarah said firmly. "That's never been okay." "But it's understandable," I replied, surprising myself with my own defense of Melissa's behavior. She's worked hard to build a certain life, to fit into Eric's world. I don't blame her for not wanting her middle-class mother to disrupt that image. "I absolutely do blame her for that," Sarah shot back. "You raised us to value character over status, remember? She's abandoned those values, and that's on her, not on you." Before I could respond, another knock interrupted us. This time it was Jason, looking uncharacteristically stern. "Mom, we need to talk about dinner," he said without preamble. "What about dinner?" "Melissa has decided that Christmas dinner should be limited to immediate family this year. That means Eric's parents will be at the main table in the dining room. The rest of us will eat in the breakfast nook." I stared at him, trying to process this information. "All of us? Or just me?" Jason's expression grew darker. "Just you, Mom. The rest of us are considered immediate family. You're being moved to the kitchen." The blow was so unexpected, so deliberately cruel, that I couldn't immediately respond. Sarah stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "She's doing what?" Sarah's voice rose to a near shout. "She's making our mother eat Christmas dinner alone in the kitchen while Eric's parents get the place of honor?" "That's exactly what she's doing," Jason confirmed. "And when I told her it was unacceptable, she said it was her house and her decision." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This went beyond disappointment or family tension. This was deliberate humiliation, designed to put me in my place as clearly as possible. "Well," I said, standing and walking to my suitcase, "that makes my decision easier." "What decision?" Sarah asked. "I'm leaving." I began folding my clothes and placing them in my bag. I won't stay in a house where I'm treated like the hired. Help! Mom, wait! Jason protested. Don't let her drive you away. Stay and fight this. Fight what exactly? I asked, turning to face my children. Fight for the privilege of eating Christmas dinner alone in the kitchen? Fight for the right to be tolerated in my daughter's home? Fight to prove that I deserve basic respect from my own child? Sarah was pacing now, her agitation evident. This is insane. Melissa has completely lost perspective. No, I said quietly. I think Melissa has shown me exactly what her perspective is. I'm an inconvenience she's willing to tolerate occasionally, but only if I stay in my designated place. Today I overstepped that place, and this is her way of reminding me where I belong. The truth of it settled over us like a shroud. This wasn't about the house or my judgment or even family dynamics. This was about power and control and the systematic diminishment of someone who no longer fit the image Melissa wanted to project. Where will you go? Jason asked. It's Christmas Day. Hotels will be booked. I'll figure something out, I assured him. I've been taking care of myself for quite a while now. As I continued packing, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, expecting perhaps a message from one of my foundation colleagues or a neighbor checking in. Instead, it was from David Chen, my financial advisor. Margaret, hope you're having a wonderful Christmas. Quick question. Did you proceed with the German Village property? I have some additional comps that might interest you if you're still considering it. I stared at the message, struck by the irony. Here was a professional colleague treating me with the respect and consideration that was absent in my own family. David knew about my financial capabilities, trusted my judgment, and viewed me as a competent client worthy of his expertise. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the text. My financial advisor, checking in about the house purchase. Sarah read it, then looked up at me with new understanding. Mom, you have a whole professional life, don't you? People who respect you, who value your opinions, who see you as competent and capable. Yes, I said simply, and we've been so focused on family dynamics that we haven't really acknowledged that, Jason added, looking ashamed. Even I've been guilty of thinking of you primarily as Mom, rather than as Margaret Wilson, the professional. It was a moment of clarity that felt both validating and heartbreaking. My children loved me, but they had unconsciously diminished me in the same way Melissa had done deliberately. They saw me through the lens of our family relationships, rather than as a complete person with a full life beyond motherhood. I think, I said carefully, that all of you, even those who support me, have struggled to see me as anything other than your aging mother. The difference is that you're willing to expand that view when presented with evidence. Melissa isn't. A commotion in the hallway interrupted our conversation. Raised voices, footsteps on the stairs, doors slamming. The sound of family discord that had been simmering all day was finally boiling over. Eric's voice carried from the first floor. This is completely unacceptable, Melissa. I won't have my mother-in-law treated this way in our home. Melissa's response was muffled but clearly defensive. More voices joined in, Charles's deeper tones, Vivian's sharper ones, even Lauren adding her perspective from the breakfast nook. Sounds like the whole house is choosing sides, Sarah observed. And I don't want to be the cause of that, I said, zipping my suitcase closed. This family has enough problems without me being the catalyst for more conflict. But even as I said I realized that my leaving wouldn't solve the underlying issues. It would only allow Melissa to avoid confronting the consequences of her choices. My absence would let everyone pretend that the problem had been resolved rather than addressed. Standing in that guest room, listening to my family argue about my place in their lives, I faced a decision that went beyond where to spend Christmas dinner. I could leave quietly, preserving the illusion of family harmony while accepting my diminished status. Or I could stay and force the confrontation that might either repair or permanently damage my relationship with my eldest daughter. The kitchen exile wasn't really about dinner arrangements. It was about whether I would accept being relegated to the margins of my own family's life. And as the voices continued to rise from downstairs, I realized that my response to this moment would define not just my relationship with Melissa, but my relationship with myself, the woman I had become, the foundation director, the grant writer, the professional who commanded respect in boardrooms across the state, deserved better than eating Christmas dinner alone in a kitchen. The question was whether I was prepared to fight for that dignity, even if it meant losing my daughter in the process. As I stood there with my packed suitcase, the argument downstairs reached a crescendo. Eric's voice cut through the chaos with unusual authority. "Melissa, this stops now. Either your mother joins us at the dinner table like a member of this family, or I'm taking my parents to the club for Christmas dinner and you can explain to the children why Christmas was ruined." The sudden silence that followed was more telling than the shouting had been. I could picture Melissa's face, the calculation as she weighed her options, the fury at being publicly contradicted by her husband, the realization that her play had backfired. Sarah and Jason exchanged glances. "Maybe you should wait," Sarah suggested. "It sounds like Eric is handling this." But I shook my head. This isn't Eric's fight to win for me, and even if Melissa capitulates now, she'll resent being forced into it. The damage is already done. A soft knock on the door interrupted us, followed by Eric's voice. "Margaret, may I come in?" I opened the door to find Eric looking haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. Behind him stood Lauren, her expression grim but supportive. "I owe you an enormous apology," Eric said without preamble. "What Melissa proposed for dinner arrangements is unconscionable. I've made it clear that either you join us at the dining table as an honored guest, or there won't be a family dinner at all. I appreciate that, Eric, but please let me finish." He ran a hand through his hair. "I also want to apologize for this afternoon. I let my parents' attitudes influence my judgment, and I questioned your competence without cause." Lauren showed me the Riverside Foundation's annual report on her tablet. "Your accomplishments are impressive, and I should have known that before." "Today," Lauren stepped forward. "Margaret, I've been following your foundation's work for months through their newsletter. When I saw what you'd achieved with the literacy program expansion, I showed it to several colleagues at the university. You're doing groundbreaking work in community education." The recognition felt validating, but it also highlighted how little my own family knew about my professional life. "Thank you, but I think the issue runs deeper than tonight's dinner arrangements." Eric nodded grimly. "You're right, and I'm afraid it's about to get more complicated." He glanced at Jason and Sarah. "Melissa has called her attorney. She's seriously considering pursuing guardianship proceedings." The words hit me like ice water. Even after I'd demonstrated my competence, even after the family meeting where I'd laid out the careful research behind my decisions, Melissa was still determined to treat me as incompetent. "On what grounds?" Sarah demanded, her voice sharp with anger. "The house purchase," Eric replied. "She's convinced that spending that kind of money on what she sees as an impulsive gift demonstrates impaired judgment. She's also concerned about what other financial decisions you might make without family input." I sat down heavily on the bed. "So we're back to that. No matter what evidence I present of my competence, the gift itself is being used as proof of incompetence." "There's something else," Eric said quietly. "My mother spoke with Melissa privately after our meeting. Vivian suggested that elderly people often exhibit poor judgment in gradual ways, and that family intervention should happen sooner rather than later." Lauren made a disgusted sound. "Vivian Taylor has never worked a day in her life. Her idea of financial management is deciding which credit card to use at Nordstrom. She has no business advising anyone about fiscal responsibility." "Lauren," Eric warned, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "No, I'm not done," Lauren continued, her academic background evident in her analytical approach. Margaret manages a $12 million foundation. She's been doing it successfully for years. The board includes some of the most respected business leaders in the state. They wouldn't keep her in that position if she showed any signs of cognitive decline or poor judgment. Melissa doesn't see it that way, Eric said. She views the foundation work as volunteer busy work for retirees. The casual dismissal of my career stung, but it also clarified something important. Melissa wasn't just questioning this one decision. She was systematically devaluing everything I had built in my professional life. My phone rang, interrupting the conversation. The caller ID showed Rebecca Martinez, my real estate agent. I almost declined the call, but something made me answer. Margaret, I hope I'm not interrupting your Christmas, Rebecca said. But I wanted to give you some exciting news. The seller of the Maple Street property contacted me this afternoon. Apparently, they've received an offer from a developer who wants to tear down the house and build condominiums. I felt my heart sink. The beautiful Victorian house that had sparked this entire crisis was about to be destroyed. However, Rebecca continued, they're legally obligated to honor your purchase contract first. They wanted to confirm that you're still planning to complete the transaction. If so, they'll decline the developer's offer. I looked around the room at my family members, all watching me intently. Here was a perfect opportunity to undo the decision that had caused so much turmoil. I could withdraw from the purchase, let the house be demolished and return to the status quo. Yes, I heard myself saying, I'm completing the purchase. Rebecca sounded delighted. Wonderful, I'll let them know. The closing is scheduled for January 3rd, as planned. After I hung up, the room was silent. Why? Eric asked finally. Why complete a purchase that's causing this much family conflict? I considered the question carefully. Because walking away from it now would validate every assumption about my incompetence. It would confirm that my judgment was flawed, that the family was right to question my decisions, that I need oversight and management. But if Melissa won't accept the gift, Jason began. Then the house doesn't have to be a gift, I interrupted. It can be an investment, a place for me to live if I choose to downsize, a rental property, or I can sell it in a few years when the market improves. The room was quiet as they processed this. You know what? Sarah said suddenly. I think you should keep it. Better yet, I think you should move into it. Sarah, Eric started. No, hear me out. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she developed her idea. Mom has been talking about downsizing. For years. This house is in a vibrant neighborhood close to the foundation office, perfect for someone who wants to remain active and engaged. If Melissa can't appreciate the gift, maybe it's exactly what Mom needs for herself. Lauren nodded thoughtfully. German Village has a wonderful community of professionals and retirees. There are book clubs, wine tastings, historical society, meetings. It would be perfect for someone with Margaret's interests. I felt a spark of possibility. The house I had purchased for Melissa could indeed become my own fresh start, a place where I was valued for who I was rather than constantly reminded of who I wasn't. There's one more thing, Eric said, pulling out his phone. I've been in contact with my attorney about Melissa's guardianship threat. He's advised me that given your professional responsibilities and demonstrated competence, any such proceedings would be extremely difficult to pursue successfully. But they could be pursued? I asked. Theoretically, yes. But he's also suggested that you might want to consider some protective measures. Updated estate planning documents that clearly articulate your wishes. Perhaps a letter from your physician, confirming your cognitive health. Documentation of your professional competencies. It was sound advice, though it pained me to need such protections against my own daughter. I can help with that, Lauren offered. I know several elder law attorneys through my work at the university. Good people who specialize in protecting seniors' autonomy. As we talked, I realized something significant was happening. My support network was expanding beyond my two younger children to include Eric and Lauren, people who had witnessed Melissa's behavior and found it unacceptable. Even in the midst of family crisis, new alliances were forming. A tentative knock on the door interrupted us. This time it was Vivian Taylor, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Margaret, may I speak with you privately?" The others glanced at each other, but filed out, leaving me alone with the woman who had been so dismissive earlier in the day. "I want to apologize," Vivian said without preamble. "I spoke without full knowledge of your circumstances, and I influenced my daughter-in-law in ways that were inappropriate." I waited, saying nothing. "Charles and I have been discussing today's events. We realize that we don't actually know you very well, and we made assumptions based on our own prejudices." She paused, clearly uncomfortable with the admission. "Eric has informed us about your professional accomplishments. We had no idea." "Melissa never mentioned them?" Vivian's expression tightened. "Melissa has always presented you as someone who needed more support than you apparently require." The euphemistic language couldn't hide the truth. Melissa had been systematically misrepresenting me to Eric's family, portraying me as a burden rather than a capable professional. "I see," I said quietly. "Charles and I would like to start over if you're willing. We'd also like to make it clear to Melissa that we don't support any legal action against you. Your competence is evident, and any suggestion otherwise is—" She paused, searching for diplomatic language. "Misguided." It was an unexpected olive branch from an unexpected source. As I accepted Vivian's apology, I realized that my support network was growing in ways I hadn't anticipated. People who had dismissed me hours earlier were now seeing me clearly, while my own daughter remained determined to diminish me. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to control me, Melissa had instead isolated herself, pushing away the very people who might have supported her perspective if she had approached the situation differently. As Christmas Day drew to a close, I found myself surrounded by family members who respected my autonomy and capabilities, while the daughter I had tried so hard to please stood increasingly alone in her opposition to my independence. It wasn't the Christmas I had planned, but it was perhaps the Christmas I needed, one that clarified relationships, revealed true allies, and set the stage for whatever came next. Christmas dinner proceeded with a tension that no amount of perfectly prepared food could mask. Melissa had reluctantly agreed to seat me at the dining table, but her resentment was palpable. She spoke primarily to Eric's parents, pointedly excluding me from conversations while maintaining the facade of gracious hostess for everyone else. I found myself seated between Jason and Charles Taylor, an arrangement that proved unexpectedly pleasant. Charles, apparently chastened by his wife's earlier apology, made genuine efforts to engage me in conversation about the Foundation's work. His questions were thoughtful, revealing a sharp business mind that understood the complexities of nonprofit management. "The challenge with literacy programs," he observed during the main course, "is measuring long-term impact. How do you track whether a child who learns to read at 6 becomes a successful adult at 26? "It's one of our biggest challenges," I agreed, grateful for his genuine interest. "We've developed partnerships with local schools to track academic progress through graduation, and we're beginning to see data on college enrollment rates. But you're right, the full impact won't be measurable for years." Across the table, I noticed Melissa's expression tighten as her father-in-law engaged me as a professional equal. The conversation continued throughout dinner, with other family members joining in to ask questions about the Foundation's programs, funding sources, and expansion plans. By dessert, I realized something remarkable was happening. For the first time in years, my family was seeing me not as mom or grandma, but as Margaret Wilson, the professional. Jason asked about board governance, Sarah inquired about international literacy partnerships, and even Lauren mentioned potential collaboration opportunities with her university. Only Melissa remained silent, her face growing increasingly drawn as the conversation continued to center around work she had always dismissed as volunteer busy work. After dinner, as the family dispersed to various activities, I found myself alone with Madison and Miles, helping them set up a new board game they'd received for Christmas. The twins had been largely insulated from the day's adult drama, but they were perceptive children who had clearly sensed the undercurrents. "Grandma," Madison said as she arranged the game pieces. "Mom seemed mad at you today. Did you guys have a fight?" I chose my words carefully. "Your mom and I see some things differently right now. Sometimes that happens in families." Miles looked up from reading the instruction manual. "Is it about the house you bought? I heard Dad talking to someone on the phone about it." Children hear everything, I reminded myself. "Yes, partially. I bought a house that I thought your mom would like, but she wasn't happy about it." "Why wouldn't she be happy about getting a house?" Madison asked with the straightforward logic of a 12-year-old. It was a fair question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "people have complicated feelings about gifts, especially big ones. Your mom felt like I should have asked her first, but then it wouldn't be a surprise," Miles pointed out. "Exactly," I agreed, touched by his simple understanding. Madison was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Grandma, are you going to move to the new house?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it. "Why do you ask?" "Because it might be cool to have a grandma who lives in a different neighborhood. We could visit you there and it would be like going to a different city." Her innocent enthusiasm for the possibility made me smile. Out of the mouths of babes, what had seemed like a family crisis to the adults was simply an interesting possibility to the children. "Would you like that?" I asked. "Yeah," Miles said, looking up from the game board. "Your house now is nice, but it's kind of far from everything. If you lived in German Village, we could walk to that ice cream place and the bookstore." Their easy acceptance of change, their excitement about new possibilities, stood in stark contrast to their mother's resistance to anything that challenged her carefully constructed world. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed and the house had settled into an uneasy quiet, I found myself on the back patio again, this time wrapped in one of Eric's heavy coats. The night was clear and cold, with stars visible despite the suburban light pollution. Sarah joined me, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I've been thinking about what Madison asked earlier," I said, accepting the warm mug gratefully. "About whether I might move to the German Village house. And I think I might actually consider it." The words surprised me as I spoke them. Until that moment, I hadn't seriously contemplated the possibility. Sarah settled into the adjacent chair. "What's changed your mind?" I considered the question. "Today, I think, seeing how differently various people react to me when they understand what I actually do, what I've accomplished. In Melissa's world, I'm an aging mother who needs to be managed. In my professional world, I'm a respected colleague. Maybe it's time to live somewhere that aligns more with the latter." "The house would be perfect for that," Sarah agreed. "Close to downtown, walkable neighborhood, lots of cultural activities. You could host foundation events, entertain colleagues." The idea was taking shape in my mind. I could convert the carriage house into an office space, maybe offer it as a meeting venue for nonprofit organizations. The main house has beautiful, entertaining spaces that are going to waste in my current situation. Plus, Sarah added with a grin, it would drive Melissa absolutely crazy to have you living in German Village. That's prime real estate territory, very prestigious address. I laughed despite myself. That's hardly a reason to make a major life decision. Maybe not the primary reason, Sarah conceded, but it would be a nice side benefit. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching our breath create small clouds in the cold air. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Mom, can I ask you something else?" When did you start diminishing yourself around Melissa? The question hit me unexpectedly. What do you mean? I mean, when did you start downplaying your accomplishments, apologizing for your success, making yourself smaller to avoid threatening her image? I opened my mouth to deny it, then stopped. Sarah was right. Somewhere along the way, I had begun editing myself in Melissa's presence, presenting a version of Margaret Wilson that was less accomplished, less confident, less threatening to her daughter's sense of social superiority. I'm not sure when it started, I admitted. Gradually, I think, after she married Eric and began moving in different circles. I didn't want her to feel embarrassed by having a mother who didn't fit in. But in trying not to embarrass her, you made yourself invisible, Sarah observed. And once you became invisible, it was easy for her to start treating you as incompetent. The insight was painful but accurate. In my efforts to make Melissa comfortable, I had inadvertently contributed to my own diminishment. So what do I do about it? I asked. You stop, Sarah said firmly. You stop making yourself smaller to accommodate her insecurities. You live your life fully, professionally, proudly. And if she can't handle having a successful, independent mother, that's her problem to solve. Over the next hour, we talked through practical considerations, the logistics of moving, how to handle the transition, whether to keep my current house as a rental property. The more we discussed it, the more excited I became about the possibility. By the time we went inside, I had made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I would move to the German village house, not as a retreat from family conflict, but as a step toward a life that better reflected who I had become. The house Melissa had rejected as manipulative would become my declaration of independence, a physical manifestation of my refusal to be diminished or marginalized. When I finally went to bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Anticipation. For the first time since Thomas's death, I was excited about the future rather than merely enduring it. The next morning brought a flurry of departure preparations as various family members prepared to return to their respective homes. Jason and Lauren were flying back to Seattle, while Sarah needed to return to her assignment preparations for her next overseas deployment. As I packed my own belongings, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. I had arrived hoping to repair my relationship with Melissa through a generous gift. Instead, I was leaving with a clearer understanding of family dynamics, a stronger sense of my own worth, and a plan for a new chapter in my life. Eric appeared in my doorway as I was zipping my suitcase. Margaret, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with Melissa, you're always welcome in our home. What happened yesterday? The dinner arrangement. That will never happen again. Thank you, Eric. That means a lot to me. He hesitated, then asked, Are you really considering moving to the German village house? I am, I confirmed. It feels like the right next step. Eric nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think it's a good decision. You deserve to live somewhere that celebrates who you are rather than asking you to apologize for it. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, I encountered Melissa in the kitchen, making coffee with mechanical precision. She looked up as I entered, her expression guarded. So you're really leaving, she said. Yes. And you're really keeping the house? Yes. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, Are you doing this to punish me? The question revealed so much about how she viewed the world, as a series of actions designed to reward or punish her, rather than decisions made by autonomous individuals pursuing their own interests. No, Melissa, I said gently. I'm doing this for me. For the first time in years, I'm making a decision based on what I want and need, rather than what I think other people expect from me. She turned back to the coffee maker without responding, and I realized that our conversation was over. Not with anger or dramatic declarations, but with the quiet acknowledgement that we had reached an impasse. As I said goodbye to the grandchildren and hugged my other children, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. The family gathering I had anticipated for months was ending in fracture, but it was also ending in clarity. Driving home through the quiet streets of Christmas morning, I found myself humming, something I hadn't done spontaneously in months. Change was coming, and for the first time in years, I was the one choosing its direction. The week between Christmas and New Year's brought a series of phone calls that would reshape my understanding of family dynamics. The first came from Jason on December 27th, just as I was reviewing the moving timeline Rebecca had prepared. "Mom, I wanted to give you a heads up. Melissa called me last night. She's convinced that your decision to move to German Village is proof of a breakdown in judgment." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "What exactly did she say?" "She thinks you're making major life decisions out of spite, to punish her for not accepting the house as a gift. She's also concerned that you're isolating yourself from family support systems." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Jason, I've lived independently for over a decade since your father died. Moving from one house to another in the same city hardly constitutes isolation." I told her that, Jason assured me. I also pointed out that German Village is actually closer to your work and has a more active community than your current neighborhood, but she's fixated on the idea that you're acting irrationally. Over the next few days, similar conversations occurred with Sarah and Eric. Each call revealed more about Melissa's state of mind and her determination to cast my decisions as evidence of incompetence rather than autonomy. The pattern was becoming clear. Any choice I made that didn't align with her preferences was being reframed as a symptom of declining judgment. It was a subtle but effective form of gaslighting designed to make me question my own competence. The breakthrough came on December 30th, during an unexpected visit from Eric. He arrived at my house in the late afternoon, looking tired and somewhat sheepish. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced," he said. "I was hoping we could talk privately." I invited him in, noting the contrast between his demeanor now and his confident bearing at Christmas dinner. He seemed diminished, uncertain. "Margaret, I need to apologize again," he began once we were seated in my living room. "But more than that, I need to ask for your advice." "About what?" Eric ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd noticed he made when stressed. "About Melissa. About what's happening to our marriage." I waited, saying nothing, allowing him the space to continue. "She's become obsessed with controlling this situation with you in the house. She's consulted 3 different attorneys about guardianship proceedings. She's researched residential facilities for seniors with cognitive decline. She's even contacted your doctor's office trying to get information about your mental health." My blood ran cold. "She did what?" "She called Dr. Peterson's office, claiming to be concerned about your welfare. Of course, they couldn't give her any information due to privacy laws. But the fact that she tried..." Eric shook his head. "Margaret, I'm starting to see a side of my wife that I don't recognize. I absorbed this information, feeling both violated and validated. Melissa's actions were crossing legal and ethical boundaries, but they also demonstrated the lengths she was willing to go to prove her point." "What kind of advice are you looking for?" I asked. "I guess I want to understand when this started. When did Melissa become someone who would violate her own mother's privacy? When did she start seeing you as an enemy rather than family?" It was a painful question that forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding. "I think it started gradually, after she married you. She began to see me as a liability to her social standing. Every interaction became an opportunity for me to embarrass her or remind her of her middle-class origins." Eric nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that, about how my family's wealth and social position might have changed her." "It's not just your family's wealth," I said carefully. "It's what that wealth represents to her: security, status, acceptance in circles she'd always admired from outside. Having a foundation director for a mother doesn't carry the same social currency as having a mother who inherited wealth or married into it. But your accomplishments are significant, Eric protested. The foundation's work, your professional recognition. None of that matters in the world Melissa wants to inhabit, I interrupted. In fact, it's almost worse than if I were simply a retired teacher. At least then, I'd be safely categorized as harmless. Being professionally successful while still middle class makes me a reminder of what she's trying to escape. Eric was quiet for a long moment. She's lost sight of what actually matters, hasn't she? I think she's terrified, I said. Terrified of losing the life she's built. Terrified of being seen as ordinary. Terrified of not being enough for your world. Controlling me is her way of controlling those fears. But she's destroying our family in the process. Yes, I agreed. She is. We talked for another hour, with Eric sharing more details about Melissa's behavior over the past week. She had been making calls to various family members, trying to build a case for intervention. She had researched my financial accounts, looking for evidence of other concerning expenditures. She had even driven by the German village house multiple times, taking photos and measurements as if building a legal case. The children have started asking questions, Eric said. Madison asked me yesterday why Mommy is so angry all the time. Miles wanted to know if you're sick because he heard Melissa on the phone talking about getting Mom help. The impact on the grandchildren was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this situation. They were witnessing their mother's obsessive behavior and their family's fragmentation without understanding the cause. Eric, I said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. He nodded. Do you think I'm losing my mental faculties? Do you see evidence of cognitive decline or impaired judgment? Eric looked at me directly. No, absolutely not. If anything, you seem sharper and more focused than you have in years. Your decision to move to German Village makes perfect sense for someone in your position. Your professional responsibilities are expanding, not diminishing. You're building a life that reflects your values and interests. His certainty was both relieving and concerning. Relieving because it confirmed my own assessment of my capabilities. Concerning because it meant Melissa's campaign was based entirely on manufactured fears rather than legitimate concerns. Then why is she doing this? I asked. Because she's terrified of losing control, Eric replied. And because she's convinced herself that being right about your incompetence is more important than maintaining a relationship with you. The next day brought another revelation, this time from Sarah, who called from her apartment in Washington, D.C. Mom, I just got off the phone with Melissa. She tried to recruit me for her intervention campaign. What did she say? She wanted me to sign a letter requesting a psychiatric evaluation for you. She said that as your daughters, we had a responsibility to protect you from yourself. I felt a chill run down my spine. What did you tell her? I told her she was out of her mind, Sarah said bluntly. I also told her that if she pursued this course of action, she'd be doing it without my support, and probably without Eric's either. How did she respond? She accused me of being blinded by loyalty and said I'd regret it when you made some catastrophic financial mistake or ended up being victimized by scammers. It was becoming clear that Melissa had constructed an entire narrative in which I was vulnerable, incompetent, and in need of protection from my own poor judgment. No amount of evidence, to the contrary, would penetrate that narrative because it served her psychological needs. The phone rang again later that evening. This time it was Jason calling from Seattle. Mom, I need to tell you something that's going to upset you. Melissa contacted my principal. She did what? She called the school where I teach and asked to speak with my supervisor. She told them she was concerned about a family situation and wanted to know if I'd seemed distressed or if my work performance had declined. I was speechless. Melissa's actions were now affecting my other children's professional lives. What did your principal say? He told her it was inappropriate for her to contact my workplace about personal matters, and that if she had concerns about my welfare, she should discuss them with me directly. Jason paused. Mom, she's completely lost perspective. She's so focused on proving you're incompetent that she's willing to damage relationships with everyone who disagrees with her. That evening, as I sat in my living room surrounded by moving boxes, I reflected on how dramatically relationships had shifted in just 1 week. Eric had evolved from skeptical son-in-law to confidential ally. Sarah and Jason had moved from concerned children to fierce advocates. Even Charles and Vivian Taylor had repositioned themselves as supporters rather than critics. Only Melissa remained committed to her original narrative, increasingly isolated as her behavior became more extreme and her tactics more questionable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Eric. Melissa has scheduled a family conference call for tomorrow night. She wants to discuss next steps regarding your situation. Thought you should know. I stared at the message, realizing that we were approaching a climax in this family drama. Melissa was preparing for one final push to gain control over my life, mobilizing whatever support she could muster for her cause. But something had changed since Christmas. I was no longer the confused, hurt mother trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. I was Margaret Wilson, foundation director, homeowner, an autonomous adult who had the right to make her own decisions. The family conference call would be Melissa's last chance to make her case for intervention. It would also be my opportunity to set boundaries once and for all, to make clear that I would not be managed, controlled, or diminished by anyone, including my own daughter. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a sense of calm determination settle over me. The time for accommodating Melissa's fears and insecurities had passed. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, one based on mutual respect, or, if necessary, respectful distance. The choice, I realized, was ultimately hers to make. The family conference call was scheduled for 7 o'clock on December 31st, New Year's Eve, which seemed oddly appropriate for what I suspected would be a watershed moment. I prepared for the call like a business meeting, gathering documentation of my professional responsibilities, financial statements, and even a letter from Dr. Peterson confirming my excellent cognitive and physical health, a precaution I'd requested after learning about Melissa's attempted privacy violations. At precisely 7, my phone rang. Eric had set up the conference line, and I could hear the various family members joining. Jason from Seattle, Sarah from D.C., and Melissa from her home office just 20 minutes away from me. Thank you all for making time tonight, Melissa began, her voice carrying the artificial authority of someone trying to control a situation that was slipping away from her. I've called this meeting because I'm deeply concerned about Mom's recent behavior and the decisions she's been making. I waited, letting her lay out her case completely before responding. The house purchase was just the beginning, Melissa continued. Now she's talking about moving there, completely upending her life at 67 years old. She's making major decisions without family input, isolating herself from our support system, and frankly, I think she needs professional evaluation. What kind of professional evaluation? Eric's voice carried a note of skepticism that clearly surprised Melissa. Cognitive assessment. A geriatric psychiatrist to determine if she's competent to make these kinds of financial and life decisions independently. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the other family members processing the implications of what Melissa was suggesting. Finally, Jason spoke. Melissa, are you listening to yourself? You're talking about having our mother declared incompetent because she bought a house and decided to move. Millions of people do that every year without psychiatric evaluation. It's not just about the house, Melissa shot back. It's about the pattern, the secretiveness, the impulsive spending, the refusal to consider family input. Stop, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. Just stop right there, Melissa. The call went quiet, I've listened to you characterize my decisions as impulsive, secretive, and evidence of declining judgment. Now it's my turn to speak, and I want everyone to listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I am Margaret Wilson. I am 67 years old, not 97. I hold a master's degree in education and have been successfully managing a $12 million foundation for the past 6 years. Our board includes some of the most respected business leaders in Ohio, and they have entrusted me with strategic planning, fiscal oversight, and program development that affects thousands of families annually. I paused, letting that sink in. I purchased the German Village House after 3 months of research, professional consultation, and careful financial planning. The decision to move there is based on practical considerations: proximity to my work, access to cultural amenities, and a community of professionals and retirees who share my interests. But, Mom, Melissa started. I'm not finished, I said firmly. Melissa, over the past week, you have violated my medical privacy by attempting to access my health records, contacted my children's workplaces to gather information about our family situation, researched residential facilities for people with dementia, and consulted multiple attorneys about having me declared incompetent. I could hear Melissa's sharp intake of breath. These actions don't demonstrate concern for my welfare. They demonstrate a systematic campaign to undermine my autonomy and independence. And frankly, they reveal more about your judgment than mine. Eric's voice broke the silence. Margaret's right, Melissa. Your behavior this week has been completely inappropriate. You're taking her side. Melissa's voice rose in pitch. I'm not taking anyone's side, Eric replied. I'm recognizing reality. Your mother is a competent, successful professional who made a well-researched decision about her living situation. Your response has been to try to have her declared mentally incompetent. Can you honestly say that's a proportionate reaction? The call erupted into multiple conversations, with Melissa arguing simultaneously with Eric, Jason, and Sarah. I waited for the chaos to subside before speaking again. There's something else we need to address, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Melissa, you've spent years treating me as an embarrassment to your social status. You've minimized my professional accomplishments, excluded me from social gatherings, and made it clear that my presence in your elevated world is unwelcome. That's not true. It is true, I continued. And I enabled it by making myself smaller, by downplaying my achievements, by apologizing for not fitting into your idea of what a mother should be. But I'm done with that. I stood up from my desk, even though no one could see me, feeling the need to physically embody the strength I was finding in my voice. I will not be managed, controlled, or diminished. I will not submit to psychiatric evaluation to prove my competence to make decisions about my own life, and I will not continue to accommodate your insecurities at the expense of my own dignity. So what does that mean? Melissa asked, her voice smaller now. It means that our relationship needs to change fundamentally. You can choose to respect me as an autonomous adult and rebuild our connection on that basis. Or you can continue this campaign to control me, in which case you'll be doing it without my participation. Sarah's voice came through clearly. Mom, I think you're handling this exactly right. Jason agreed. Melissa, you've gone too far. Way too far. I waited to see if Melissa would respond, but the line was quiet. Finally, Eric spoke. Melissa, I think you owe your mother an apology. Several apologies, actually. For what? Melissa's voice was defensive. For caring about her welfare? For violating her privacy, undermining her autonomy, and treating her like a child instead of the accomplished professional she is, Eric replied. The silence stretched on until Melissa finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was scared. It was the first honest thing she'd said all evening. Scared of what? I asked gently. Scared that you were changing, that you didn't need us anymore, that you were moving away from the family emotionally and now physically. Her voice broke slightly, scared that I was losing my mother. The admission hung in the air, revealing the fear beneath all the controlling behavior. "Melissa," I said softly, "you weren't losing your mother, but you were losing the version of your mother who made herself small to make you comfortable. That woman is gone, and she's not coming back." "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide whether you can love and respect the woman I actually am, not the diminished version I used to present. You decide whether you want a relationship, based on mutual respect or no relationship at all." The call ended without resolution, but with clarity. Lines had been drawn, positions had been stated, and choices had been laid out. 3 months later, I was settled into my German village home, hosting my first dinner party for Foundation Board members in my beautifully restored dining room. The house had become everything I'd hoped, a reflection of my professional success, a gathering place for meaningful relationships, and a sanctuary where I was valued for exactly who I was. Eric visited regularly, often bringing Madison and Miles, who delighted in exploring the historic neighborhood and helping me plant a garden in the backyard. Jason and Sarah had both come for extended visits, marveling at how the house seemed to perfectly suit my personality and lifestyle. Melissa had chosen silence. No visits, no calls, no acknowledgement of my move or my new life. It was painful, but it was also peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, editing myself, or apologizing for my accomplishments. On a warm April evening, as I was watering the tulips that were blooming along my front walkway, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. Melissa emerged, looking uncertain and older than her 45 years. "Hello, Mom," she said, stopping at the garden gate. "Hello, Melissa." "Your house is beautiful," she admitted, looking up at the restored Victorian facade. "It suits you." "Thank you." We stood there for a moment, neither sure how to proceed. "I've been thinking about what you said on that phone call," she finally ventured, "about loving and respecting who you actually are." I waited, saying nothing. "I think I'd like to try," she said, "if you're willing." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the controlling woman who had tried to have me declared incompetent, but the scared little girl who was afraid of losing her mother. "I'm willing," I said, opening the garden gate. "But this time, we build something real." As we walked toward my front door together, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The Christmas gift that had seemed like such a disaster had ultimately given us both something we needed: the chance to see each other clearly, to establish boundaries, and to choose our relationship consciously rather than simply accepting old patterns. It wasn't the ending I had imagined when I first wrapped that deed in silver paper. It was better. It was honest, hard-won, and built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than fear and control. Sometimes the most valuable gifts aren't the ones we intend to give, but the truths that emerge when our carefully constructed facades finally fall away. That Christmas had stripped away illusions and forced us all to confront who we really were. In the end, that turned out to be the greatest gift of all. As I served tea in my sunny kitchen, watching my daughter truly see my home, and by extension, my life, for the first time, I understood that some relationships can only be saved by being willing to lose them. Only by being prepared to walk away had I created the space for something genuine to grow in its place. The woman who had been made to eat Christmas dinner alone in the kitchen was gone. In her place sat someone who would never again accept less than she deserved from anyone, even her own daughter. And that, I realized, was the most important lesson of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.